There is cooperation among crabber captains, but with half the money to be split. So you don't have to. No captain is willing to work with another captain, but there are always exceptions. Jack, captain of the Mariner, made his fortune by working together. This isn't another day that Jack's been fooling around. Captain Keith of the Wizard. He was known for his short temper. You know you're being lied to by Jack. How do you get back at Jack? So, get the seeds ready. Watch the show with me. 220 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor. The weather here is not so good. The highest waves are now 25 feet high. The crew is fishing for crab pots on deck. But the harvest of this cage is not very good. So Old White finished fishing this batch of crab pots. I'm going south of 166 degrees latitude. The crew cast the anchor hook. Old White just wants to get out all the crab pots. Get out of this hellhole of bad harvest and bad weather. White's quota is now down to 160,000 pounds. Just get this over with and you get a check for $1 million. I bought a house for my new grandchild. Run with the take-up machine. The crab pot was pulled up, but the harvest was bad. At this rate, the crew won't get home on time. Carl looked at the junk he had caught. I thought of my oldest son. He and his wife are ready. Thanksgiving dinner is waiting for you to go home. They're going to be pretty upset. They're going to be a few days late. Old White listening to the radio show and smile. He understood the crew's desire to go home. After all, I have a little grandson waiting for me at home. But you can't go back on a crab boat without catching a crab. This rule is not to be broken unless it's an emergency. Carl on deck was talking again. I just had a 3-month-old daughter. Hearing this, Old White instantly refreshed. Just in time to find a childhood sweetheart for your grandchild. Carl was called up immediately. Old White came up to congratulate him on the birth of your daughter. That's the last thing Carl needs. The old man called himself up. It's after your own daughter. Then the two of them began a wave of extreme tug. But in the end, Old White was able to bring the topic back to the right track. He called Carl up here to help him with the crab plan. Carl feels that these waters are perfect for crabs. And White was ready to make a bet with Carl. I'll bet a dozen crab pots on one person who gets the most. Carl embraced the bet too. White's bet is a 10% bonus. Carl's bet is for his daughter to get to know the Old White grandson. Something tells me this bet doesn't matter who wins. Old White is the biggest profit. The old Den is a shrewd man. Later, White said he just wanted Carl to focus on catching crabs. He could be in danger if he keeps thinking. And the Old White also said that he will win this time. With the crab pot into the sea. 100 miles northwest of the Mariner. Jack was happy that the quota was almost met. Hallie was not happy, because right now their harvest is pretty dismal. He said he'd never be happy without a crab in the crab pot. As soon as this came out, Jack was amused. As Harley said, the crab pot was a dismal harvest. Now the gains are even in the single digits. Jack is only worried about paying his mortgage. The Mariner loan still stands at $2 million. So he needs to make at least another $200,000 this season. To keep the loans flowing, the second pot of crabs goes out and harvests as usual. The poor harvest made Jack want to cooperate again. Then I turned my head and saw the wizard nearby. But then I thought about the time Harley screwed Keith. Calling Keith right now is a little tricky. 19 miles southwest of the witch. They're having a cool harvest. I caught a crab half as big as my face. So Keith signs crabbing is pretty good. Throw the rope with the spear. Sure enough, it was a full pot of crabs. Keith says the crabs will head west by June. Now behind this trench on the map. It's the final destination of the crab migration. But I just don't know where the crab is. So the exact position of the crab has to be trial and error. That's when Jack called. Jack is here to work with the Witcher. Keith thought it was a good thing. I wonder if the crabs are west or east. Jack came to work with him. I just told Jack where they were. Finally, whoever finds the crab will call the other person over. Although Keith was happy to work with Jack. But he's worried about Harley giving Jack bad advice. This old Den's been fighting Keith for 20 years. A pair of old enemies in every sense of the word. Hallie stole Keith's crab a few weeks ago. Let's hope Jack works with him. 130 miles west of the Summer Bay. Bill's high blood pressure from the last time Jack was mad at him, which triggered the rupture of the capillaries in the left eye. He's really worried about complications from cancer now. I see empty crab pots. Bill's blood pressure is higher. We're 2 weeks from delivery on the Summer Bay. But the cancer surgery is only a week away. Suddenly, there seems to be something wrong with the Jack. The crab pot hanging from it suddenly began to wobble. The crew couldn't control the direction even if they tried. The situation startled the crew of the crab pot. The operator's crew struggled to control the direction. But this thing has no control. Bill called the maintenance man quickly, but he was told he couldn't fix it either. Bill had to ask the crew of the crane to be careful, although he was very slow. But this thing is still teetering. You know, a lot of jobs can't be done without cranes. Now he had to think about returning home. 130 miles east of the Wizard. The crew has begun fishing for crab pots. Keith doesn't know where the crab colonies are. But now Jack is on board. It saves a lot of trial and error. Force with take-up machine. Keith also prayed with his fingers. But the crab pot that came out was not ideal. He had to telephone Jack to inquire about him. The mariner, 2 miles away. Jack saw the call and hung up. The harvest on their deck is quite good. Jack ended up taking the prize for himself. Should I tell you these guys don't do a damn thing? The harvest was better in the second cage. But Jack hung up on Keith again. Hallie told Jack to send Keith one right away, or old Den's gonna suspect we're lying to him. But don't tell him what's really going on here. Random Jack called Keith. Keith asked if they had found any crabs. So Jack started talking nonsense with a straight face. This set off Keith's alarm. And then Keith thought about it more and more and more and more. Jack thought he got away with it. Hallie was also pleased with Jack's performance. With the crab pot falling into the sea, the view goes to the Witcher. Keith couldn't stop thinking that something was wrong. Then I turned on the GPS to see where Jack's boat was. He's been gone for a while, but he turned back a few moments later. Why would he come back if there were no crabs? Jack, who was harvesting, received the call immediately. As soon as I got on the phone, I heard Hallie directing the crew. He immediately asked Jack if Hallie was on the boat. Jack had to confess that Hallie was still on board. Keith listened to everything. Got it. Then he said he wanted to talk to old Den Hallie. Keith angrily expressed her true love for him. Instead, he instructed Jack to lie to himself with false information. Hallie tried to defend himself. But Keith, who's been fighting this old Den for over 20 years, you can't understand what this Harley is thinking. And then Keith started digging up the old scores. I want you to list all the ones that were burned by Hallie. One last greeting to the whole family. Hallie was not angry. They have plenty of crabs to catch anyway. Can't keep fighting with Keith. Should I say no empty hand? White Wolf, let them play understand. The view goes to Keith. He ordered the crew to pull out the crab pots. Head west at full speed. Blitz Jack's waters. 230 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor. 10 minutes before White reveals the game. Carl was very nervous. Old White, this old Den here, is smiling. After all, you win and lose. Losing is a little gift to your future granddaughter-in-law. If you win, it's even better. I think so, but I say it to the camera. The bet was just to ease Carl's homesickness. Let him work hard and make sure nothing happens. Old White, this young plan is really high. Anderson compared to White. He's like a rookie. With the crew cast the anchor hook. Take-up machine slowly running. Carl's first hit was a big one. The heart that had just been hanging immediately let down. There were 42 animals harvested in this cage. The second cage looks thinner, but a closer count revealed 56. The third cage of crabs came up with a little more. I counted 58 of them, and they felt like they had it. Old White, or Unhurried, said, I can totally beat Carl. We're at 48 miles southwest of the Summer Bay. Bill wants to get some more crabs before he goes back to Hong Kong. We need 85% of the quota. That's when the hospital called. Asked about Bill's progress. I heard Bill say his eyes were suddenly bleeding. The doctor knew something was wrong, because it could be a sign of cancer spreading, if the cancer really is spreading. So Bill won't last a month without treatment. So the doctor told him to come back in 2 days for treatment. The string of bad things made Bill's scalp tingle. He can't even get 70% of his inventory together. Bill can only gamble now. 110 crab pots in the deep ditch will make up the quota. With the crew cast the anchor hook. Take-up machine slowly turn. The crab pot has returned as expected. One crab after another landed on the sorting machine. Looks like Bill won't be saving on his treatment. We'll go straight to the VIP room. The second cage is even larger. Well, it looks like there's no need to save the nursing fees. You can have your pretty nurse sister. The third cage can eat well in the hospital, while happily pulling the fourth cage. The take-up machine that has not been maintained for many years is angry. It's not fun to be angry and to leak some oil. It gave Bill a mouthful of piss. I had to drop the line I was pulling in first. As a result, a careless crew lost Jingzhou. Luckily, one of the crew members was quick to cut the rope. That's what saved the careless crewman. It's a bad day for Bill. But luckily, the crew that got stuck was fine. If I just accidentally dislocated my foot, Bill won't be able to stay in the VIP room, despite the loss of a cage. But we saved the crew's lives. It's not too bad, because the structure of the take-up machine is complex. Engineers without professional tools can do nothing. This is a good match for the good and the bad, even though Bill's heart is not willing to. Must return to port this time too. The crew was not satisfied with the news. But everyone knows the captain's condition. I didn't even say a word. Bill wanted to do his best. Finish your last crab hunt. How unfair things are. Looking back on the heroic youth of the past. Now I can only lament the old and weak. Let's hope Bill cures the cancer. 160 miles east on the Mariner. The harvest here lasted all night. Now the crab population is slowly declining. But the crab pot is exactly where it was yesterday. Why would it decrease for no reason? Hallie turned his head and saw something. Through the binoculars, it turns out to be the witch's float. But what they did before was not true. Now I have to be dumb to eat Coptis. Despite Keith's mocking radio in his face. That's all I can say.
This area isn't, anyway, it's all of ours.
Keith couldn't be happier to see them go down. Keith also described them as vicious kings. All you want to do is plunder your treasure and lose your heart. A cage of crabs on the deck is about to pile up into a hill. But when it's time for an accident, it's time for an accident. The ship's hydro generator suddenly got angry. Keith turned it off as soon as he got the news. This thing keeps the whole ship powered. Although there's a diesel generator on board. But these things cost a lot of money to run. You can't go back if you overuse it. Keith was devastated. The damage was caused by a cracked hydraulic oil line valve. But there are no new valves on the Witcher. And because it's a hydraulic line, they can't weld it. And boats near them. Just the mariner that Keith just taunted. The footage came to the mariner as Keith sent for help. Sounds like he's in a lot of trouble. Hallie just said he needed to check with Jack. Jack is greedy for money. But Jack is not a heartless man. Keith is really worried that Hallie's going to screw him over. 170 miles northwest of the Northwest. White and Carl's bet is about to be revealed. I'm pulling Old White's cage now. It's nice to see so many Old Whites. At last count, there were 74 crabs. It's going to take 2 more cages to beat Carl's 408. Old White's face is almost bursting with laughter. Finally, as expected, the Old White won 430. Carl saw the situation and tried to cheat. Old White took the notebook and let Carl see. Carl had no choice but to accept. Carl lost, but White made up for it. Just pack all of your granddaughter-in-law's baby stuff. And he gave Carl a 5% raise. Old White said this wave is called win-win. He's got a granddaughter-in-law and a relationship with Carl. But he punished Carl anyway. Tell him not to talk for the next few days. The picture came to the wizard. Keith grimaced at the dying power. He had no idea the mariner was coming. But in the end, Jack came, put the valve in a bag, and floated down. Keith, who has the valve, thanks Jack. The conflict between the 3 people has also been written off. The picture comes to the summer bay in the harbor. He left the ship in the hands of his half-trained co-captain. This guy's a lot better than Sophia. The 2 embraced, and Carter officially took over the summer bay. Now we come to another port. The mariner is weighing the crabs. And this is Jack's last quota. Mariner's story officially ends in this issue. Now we come to the financial report. First place went to Mariner, who withdrew from the race. $1.206 million net profit. Second place goes to the dedicated lady. $1.2 million net profit. Third place is the Titan. $1.08 million is more than good for you. Fourth place is Northwest. $900,000 is going to have to go. The fifth Warlock. $850,000 to keep up the good work. Number 6 is Thief. $820,000 looks like Nathan's still celebrating his wife's anniversary. Seventh place, the Summer Bay. I don't know if the new captain's tough for $690,000. In last place is Seabrook. For the rest of the story, the captain and his crew. What other stories are there? Do you want to know what happened next? Do you know what it's like to be paid $10,000 an hour? It's not just deadly waves. And a man and a number. Dry Slow will be greeted by the captain. Didn't even have time to go to the bathroom. Had to empty the magazines on the deck. But it happened to be seen by Captain Germaphobe. So the captain was ready to give the creature a good beating. So what happens next? Let me explain it to you. On board the Summer Bay, Dutch Harbor, Landon officially took over the Summer Bay. It was also the first time he had sailed alone. This boat ride was like Bill's final exam for him. If he can pass this final exam, then Langdon would be a qualified captain. If you don't pass, you keep working for Bill. It's 4 days before the end of the crab season. But there are still 4 ships in contention. Last 300,000 crab quota, 240 miles north of Dutch Harbor Northwest. The Old White was almost thrown up by the waves accompanying the shadow. He sighed that he walked to that wave followed there. Now the Northwest has 20% of its quota left. The capture is expected to take another 2 or 3 days. The crew on deck cast the anchor hook. From time to time, rough seas hit the salvaging crew. It also makes the salvage job more difficult. Plus the first catch of the day, making the crew's mood even worse. Even the Old White, who was always smiling, stopped smiling. All of a sudden, a huge wave hits. Luckily, none of the crew were in trouble. The Old White, who was supposed to be quick. And now we have to slow the hull down. The random crew cast the spear rope. This cage also lived up to everyone's expectations. I counted more than 50 of them on the sorting machine. This northerly crab pot yields significantly better. So Old White deduced that the crab population was migrating north. The Northwest then made a quick decision to head north. The crab pot goes into the sea at a moment's notice. Back to Dutch Harbor. Bill is driving towards the hospital. He felt that this year's crab season had been terrible. When you get off the boat, as usual. The first thing is to go home and relax. But he's going out of the hospital for surgery first thing this year. In addition to surgery, Bill's biggest concern is the summer bay. Worried about every crew member up there, and whether Landon can hand over a copy. Answers that satisfied the crew and Bill. Back on board the summer bay in the Bering Sea. Langdon's stop at the captain's cabin was like that. Not so with the crew on deck. Landon said 8 years ago. He dreamed of being a captain many times, but I never thought it would be like this. Now they have a quota of 2,700 pounds. He was already thinking of meeting the quota himself. How happy Bill would be to get him on the phone. With the crew cast the anchor hook. The crab pot that pulls up brings him back to reality. There are only 11 crabs in this cage. The second cage gets the same result. Langdon's mood plunged. 72 miles northeast of the thief. The crew cast the anchor hook. Nathan's been worrying himself to death for 2 days. I thought I'd meet my quota soon after I got back. But it's been 2 days. There are very few crabs caught. There are only 2 days left before the delivery date. But they still have a quota of 8,000 pounds to catch. Suddenly, a huge wave came and gave the crew a fright. Nathan was unlucky, but he wasn't always unlucky. Sure enough, this cage of crabs gave him a surprise. Nathan's feeling better when he sees more crabs. The crabs are counted before the crew baits the cages. The excited crew cast the anchor hook again. Turn with the take-up machine. The new rope is tied in a knot. This makes Carl and Nathan mad at each other. A knot in the middle of a knot in the middle of a knot. It usually takes a long time to untangle a knot. But the crew is very clever. You know what? You were untying the rope. Then the guy started throwing out crab pots. Fortunately, the crew nearby cut the rope just in time. Saved the young man's life. Nathan was too scared to sit down. Nathan quickly asked if everything was okay. It's nothing if it's not an accident. Random Nathan decided to drop the crab pot right here. After all, a crew member almost died on the ship. Why do you have to give air to the crew? The lady, 32 miles southeast. Rick got a call from the manager. The manager has come to inquire about the quota completion. If you're running low, get Rick some more. Rick was so excited when he heard about the quota. After all, there's almost $3 million in loans. Rick's happy to have a bigger quota, but it took a lot of hard work on the crew. Gulick said they had 3 days left on the unloading date. The manager can still apply for quotas at this time, so it's really cool. But before we do, we need to finish the crab pot. This is the final stretch, so we all have to work together. Get the last 150,000 in your hands. Although the crew has been spinning for 30 hours. But the thought of $100,000 and getting it, the crew was too excited to sleep. Although a little out of whack. But if you can work on a crab boat, it's understandable. They can't sleep for $100,000. But why can't I sleep for $3,000 a month? Crane look at their life is too ordinary. I just gave everyone a little something. The gears that control the forward and backward movement just went off the rails. Rick was blindsided by the unexpected situation. But I'm glad most of the crab pots are out. So it's not too bad right now. Finally, let's take a look at Jacob on the defense. 126 miles northwest. Mr. Bai predicted that some of the crabs were migrating northwest. He's going to use the rest of his quota to bring them back. We don't know if it's right, and we're afraid to ask. The crew cast an anchor hook from the deck. With the take-up gear running, Clark says they still have a 2,000-pound quota. Finish this, and you can go home. The crab pot is slowly pulled out of the water. Looks like White was right about the harvest. Then a second cage of crabs came on deck. If you go back a few dozen cages, you can have this average. They can go home in less than a day. The morale of the crew was high as they faced home. This is when there's always going to be an accident. A closer look shows that the take-up machine is broken, since there are no spare replacements on board. So the only way to fix this thing is back in port. The crew was at a loss to cope with the situation. Seeing the crew like that, Old White had to personally command the crew. Let the crew tie a rope around the crab pot first. This is because the rope in the crab pot itself is too old. Using a crane directly may break directly. So let's start with the rope. Use the anchor tray to pull the crab pot out of the water. Then hang the hook of the crane on the crab pot. Finally, in the Old White up to operate the crane. Pull the crab pot up slowly. But I didn't think it would take this long. The crabs inside haven't escaped yet. It's a pain in the ass, but there's no better way. After explaining to the crew, Old White went back. Then the crew followed this method. I pulled up the crab pots. As the saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. 50 miles south on the Summer Cove. Bill called to check on the boat. Landon said the harvest at the old location was not very good. Only 30% of the quota has been met. Gave Bill a description of where the probe was headed. Bill deduced from Langdon's description. The crabs are most likely to migrate east. Tell Landon to bring the cage in, to a deep ditch in the east. Not to worry about quotas, he reassures. I already sent him the migration route. Just follow the 3 points on the map. The crab pot was slowly pulled up from the deck. The harvest is a little better than before. If we could just keep going like this. Quotas can be fulfilled by specifying the delivery date. The second cage was even better than the last. The morale of the crew is at an all-time high. After all, this isn't Bill leading the team. It's rare to see more than 20 crabs in a crab pot. Langdon studied Bilfa's crab migration route. But the more he looked, the more wrong he was. Langdon found the crabs migrating west. Not what Bill said about moving east. So he decided not to follow Bill's plan. I'm just curious. Why? No more calls to Bill. We dare not say, and we dare not ask. He says plans never change. So he had to follow his instincts. He then informed the crew of his plan. I can't believe the crew is willing to gamble with him. Then the crab pots are released according to Langdon's plan. Because Langdon hadn't told Bill the plan. So if the attempt fails, I might get fired by Angry Bill, 80 miles east on the Thief. Nathan's delivery is still a day away. If the average of these crab pots isn't over 31, they can't meet their quota. With the crew throwing the spear rope, take-up gear running, the crab pot is slowly lifted from the blue sea floor. The crew is looking forward to the first pot of crabs. With the crab pot out to sea, the harvest did not live up to expectations. Nathan can't say anything he's excited about. A full basket of crabs was dumped on the sorting machine. The crew counted 50 of them. Nathan and Carl were so happy that they couldn't hold back. The crew on deck seemed calm. The second cage of crabs is still at sea. The crabs are all plump and full of passion. You can't drop it in the sorting hole. The crew held up crabs and cheered excitedly. Look at the crabs on the sorting machine. I don't know how many years I'll make. Subsequent crab pots have been fruitful. Happy Nathan take the radio and yell, I love you. I'm not going to show you this part. 78 miles west of the Summer Bay. Langdon began to regret his passion. Why didn't listen to Bill? You have to feel the crab pot. But there's no such thing as regret. I had to pray that God would take care of him. Let him have a good harvest to deliver. With the crew throwing the spear rope, Langdon's wager is officially on. Watch the rolling take-up machine. Langdon's heart grew heavier. I never thought the captain's load was so heavy. There are many crabs coming out of the crab pot. It put Langdon at ease. Live snow crabs are loaded into the warehouse one by one. The final count stood at 55. This can give the crew a boost of confidence. I didn't expect the new captain to be so fierce. 3 days on the job, and they're making a lot of money. Langdon's confidence skyrocketed. Can't wait to give Bill the good news. 108 miles southeast of the lady, Rick brought in 2 maintenance workers, gave them a description of the crane malfunction. Then he told them to be safe and left. They had their forearms fixed for safety. Then used a screwdriver to disassemble the large arm service port. Then he went inside and started to figure out why. I was reminded by the photographer that I had stepped on the defense. That's right. That's Jacob's answer. Then they broke the news to Rick. Rick was confused when he heard that. Then they gathered the crowd together immediately. He rarely interferes on deck, though, but he can't stand to be defended on deck. The picture came to the wizard. Nathan and his wife were talking about their pets. Bala Bala's a bunch of old stories. If you are interested, you can see the original film. Picture back on track. When Rick found out it was Jacobra's plea. That little mouth looks like honey. Even Jacob couldn't handle the sweet talk. Jacob, who has been criticized, also actively reformed. The picture comes to Dutch Harbor. The witch's catch was 620,000 pounds. I made a total of $150,000. Crew members are paid in addition to basic wages. And $50,000 for the crew to have fun. Nathan's treatment on the boat was pretty good, should I say. They've been harvesting all day on the Summer Bay. Now it's time to finally meet the quota. Just in time, Bill's phone called. Bill looks like he just got out of surgery. Langdon had lived up to his hopes. Next comes the earnings round. The first place Titan. $1.35 million to tell you Anderson is really good. Second lady number. $1.29 million mainly because the crane broke down. I'd feel better than Anderson if this hadn't happened. The third Mariner. I'm out of the race. No comment. Fourth place Northwest. $950,000 Old White is not working. Anderson's already done a lot of dumping. The fifth Thief. $930,000 also officially ends the journey in this period. The sixth Witch. $900,000 from the very first place. One breath to the second last. Looks like Keith got screwed pretty bad by Jack. Seventh place, the Summer Bay. $720,000 bill is so sick. And we're going to make $720,000. Last place, Seabrook. For the rest of the story, the captain and his crew. What other stories are there? Do you want to know what happened next?